The hour you used to fall asleep has drifted later with each decade. Sleep that arrived in minutes at now takes at you remember the version that required nothing from you, the body cooling itself without instruction, the drowsiness arriving on schedule, the transition from wakefulness to unconsciousness happening so quickly you rarely noticed it. That version disappeared somewhere in your S. What replaced it is a body that lies in the dark, tired but awake. The mind cycling through a day had it already finished. The temperature not quite dropping, the heart rate not quite slowing. The nervous system running the chemistry of midday alertness into the hours it should have surrendered to. Repair. Why sleep breaks? After every transition that once delivered you into restorative sleep has weakened, melatonin rises against artificial light that holds it below the tipping point. Core temperature drops more slowly through vessels that dilate less readily. Snorts. A vagal signal that should shift the entire system from alert to repair travels through a nerve that has lost a third of its capacity and a passage that decades of forward posture have narrowed. Sleep arrives at a body that never fully completed the handover from sympathetic to parasympathetic dominance, and the difference between sleep that repairs and sleep that merely passes time has nothing to do with duration. You could sleep hours in this state and wake heavier than the night that gave you 6. What separates the two is whether the body completed a specific set of transitions before it closed its eyes. 6 inputs, 6 transitions, each one addressing a system that declined after each one preparing a different transition in the overnight repair window. The morning discussion describes 6 inputs that compensate for what time took from the waking hours. These 6 prepare the overnight window. Those morning inputs depend on the overnight repair checkpoints, each require a body that successfully completed the autonomic transition before sleep began. The hours before bed is where the transition either happens or fails. So what happens when the first gate stays gate, meal timing, and the liver clock closed? It begins with timing. Specifically, when the last food crosses your lips relative to the hour your head touches the pillow, you know the heaviness. Dinner at in the evening, bed at, and sleep that follows feels shallow, interrupted, thick. A sluggishness the next morning that belongs to 4 hours of rest, not 7. Blood sugar that should have cleared before the body entered its overnight fasting window is still circulating, and the consequences of that circulation during sleep are more specific than the vague heaviness suggests. Underneath the heaviness, the liver is operating on a clock that has nothing to do with your intentions. Hepatic clock genes issue enzymatic shutdown instructions as evening approaches. Fructokinase activity declines. Glycogen synthesis pathways downregulate. The directional logic of the entire organ shifts from distribution to maintenance. By in the evening, the liver is running at a fraction of its midday capacity. Food that would have been sorted, distributed, and burned at noon produces a higher glucose peak, a longer excursion, and more de novo lipogenesis. The liver's fat manufacturing pathway an hour later. Identical meal, different metabolic outcomes, separated by nothing but the hour. Think of a warehouse that opens at in the morning with a full complement of staff, every conveyor belt running, every sorting station manned. Morning deliveries are processed within minutes, dispatched to their destinations, burned as fuel by midday. By early afternoon, the facility is still running near peak capacity. By early evening, half the staff has gone home, and the conveyor belts are slowing. A delivery arriving after the shift change does not get processed efficiently. It sits on the loading dock, partially sorted, and by morning, the overnight crew has done the only thing it could with the excess. Shove it into long-term storage. Inside the liver, that storage is intrahepatic fat, visible on ultrasound, measurable on blood tests, and diagnosed clinically as steatotic liver disease. The clock does not negotiate. Hepatic enzyme capacity declines further with age, which is where the timing problem compounds after a year-old who finishes a late dinner has approximately hours of residual enzymatic capacity between the meal and the shutdown floor. A year-old finishing that late dinner may have minutes because the circadian drop is steeper. The decline begins earlier and the nadir arrives sooner. The buffer between processed in time and still circulating at midnight narrows with each decade. A dinner that cleared by at may still be elevating glucose at midnight because the enzymatic runway shortened while the meal schedule stayed fixed. Peripheral clock genes governing hepatic enzyme expression lose amplitude with age. As Morava and colleagues discovered in Nature, the way a dimmer switch that once moved from full brightness to full dark begins operating in a narrower range. And then the overnight consequence, glucose that remains elevated at sleep onset, enters a mismatch window the body cannot resolve until morning. Body temperature drops during sleep. Enzymatic defenses slow with the temperature because enzymatic reaction rates are temperature dependent. Every degree of cooling reduces enzymatic clearance proportionally, but the glucose substrate stays high. The Maillard reaction, the non-enzymatic bonding of glucose to structural proteins that produces permanent crosslinks called advanced glycation, end products, runs at its highest effective rate precisely during these hours. Lower enzymatic defense, sustained glucose substrate, and the crosslinks form in collagen throughout the vascular walls and joint cartilage in the crystalline lens. The overnight window that should be running tissue repair is simultaneously running tissue damage fueled by the glucose from the meal that arrived after the liver locked its doors. This mismatch extends beyond the liver. Insulin resistance increases in the evening as part of the programmed metabolic shutdown. Cells reduce their sensitivity to insulin because the intended program is to stop receiving fuel and begin repair. Glucose absorption slows across every tissue. When food arrives during this programmed resistance, glucose levels rise higher after an evening meal than after the identical meal at noon, remain elevated longer, and the pancreas must secrete more insulin to achieve clearance. The beta cells work harder to manage what the morning liver would have handled effortlessly. You test your blood glucose hours after a late dinner and find it at a reading that would have been after the same food hours earlier. You are seeing the circadian insulin resistance program encountering food it was not expecting to receive. Fewer calories, later timing, worse glucose. The liver did not care about the caloric content. It cared about the hour. Every pathway responsible for fat accumulation inside the liver worsened at night, as Margot and colleagues demonstrated at the Radcliffe Department of Medicine at Oxford. Hepatic insulin sensitivity, fat oxidation rates, de novo lipogenesis activity, all measured in the same patients during both daytime and nocturnal windows. The patients had metabolic dysfunction-associated steatotic liver disease, the condition that develops when the liver accumulates fat through metabolic dysfunction rather than alcohol. The finding that changes the clinical picture, the nighttime metabolic dysfunction, persisted even after patients lost weight and reduced their liver fat content. Previous clinical assumption ran in one direction. Fat builds up, function degrades, dysfunction follows. The Oxford data reversed the arrow. The timing dysfunction precedes the disease and drives it forward regardless of dietary quality. Fix the timing, and the disease pathway may never activate. Ignore the timing and the disease progresses regardless of what the food contains. Hours. That is the minimum clearance window for a moderate meal to process through a liver operating at reduced evening capacity. Finish eating by, if bedtime is, the food is not changed. The organ responsible for processing it at that hour has, but the liver is the metabolic preparation. What about the signal that tells the entire body it is time to transition from day to night? And what happens when that signal is held below its tipping point by the light in your living room? Gate. Blue light and melatonin. Melanopsin is a photopigment embedded in a specialized population of retinal cells that serve no visual function. These cells do not contribute to seeing. They exist to detect the presence or absence of light at a specific wavelength, approximately nanometers, the blue peak of the visible spectrum. When melanopsin absorbs photons at this wavelength, the cells send a signal through the retino-hypothalamic tract to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master circadian clock reporting daytime. Melatonin production, which should begin rising to 3 hours before habitual bedtime, a phase called dim light melatonin onset, is suppressed for as long as melanopsin continues receiving its target wavelength. Indoor artificial lighting delivers exactly this wavelength. Modern bulbs, screens, overhead fixtures all emit significant energy at nanomay. Your screen ad in the evening is broadcasting the precise wavelength that prevents the transition your body needs to begin. The incandescent bulb that lit your grandparents' evening emitted most of its energy as infrared heat with comparatively little output in the blue range. The bulb that replaced it is efficient, cool, and spectrally concentrated in exactly the range melanopsin responds to. The lighting upgrade that saved electricity simultaneously delayed melatonin onset in every room it illuminated. Amber lenses blocked percent or more of wavelengths below nanomi, removing the melanopsin wavelength from reaching the retinal cells while preserving visual function entirely. You can still see, read, and watch television with the lenses on because the visual cortex processes through cones that operate across the full spectrum. Melanopsin receives no daytime signal. Melatonin rises on schedule. Amber lenses worn before bed improve melatonin onset, subjective sleep quality, and measurable sleep architecture, as Burkhardt and Phelps documented in Chronobiology International and Shaka and colleagues confirmed in the Journal of Psychiatric Research in independent trials. Two research groups, two different protocols, convergent findings. Well, the protection matters more after because the pineal gland produces less melatonin each year. Suppressing what remains with artificial blue light pushes nighttime melatonin below the crossover for clean sleep onset. After the pineal's remaining output cannot absorb any further suppression. Two forces converging on the same molecule from opposite directions. Natural decline reducing production. Artificial light suppressing what remains. Now what the lenses change is immediate. The week I wore amber lenses from each evening. Sleep onset shortened on the first night measurably and consistently, which is why the lenses sit beside my reading chair permanently. The intervention requires no discipline beyond putting them on. The evening stays exactly as it was. The only change is which wavelengths reach the photopigment that governs the master clock. So the metabolic preparation is timed and the circadian signal is protected. Can the body reach sleep onset on those two inputs alone? It cannot. Sleep onset requires a decline. Gate, the warm shower effect in core body temperature of approximately degrees Celsius, and the body achieves this through peripheral vasodilation. Blood flows to the skin surface of the hands, the feet, the face. Heat radiates outward to the skin. Core temperature drops. A warm shower minutes before bed forces the vasodilation step. Warm water at 2 degrees Celsius on the skin dilates peripheral blood vessels maximally, opening the body's full square meters of skin surface as a heat exchange radiator. After the shower ends, the dilated vessels continue radiating heat into cooler room air. Warm blood from the core flows outward to the flushed skin, dumps its heat through radiation and convection, and returns cooled through the venous system. Core temperature drops faster and further than it would without the thermal assist. Heating the body makes it cool faster because the heating pre-dilates the radiators. Without the shower, the circadian cooling process is slow. The vasodilation gradual, the temperature decline taking to 3 hours through natural circadian mechanisms alone. With the shower, the radiators are already fully open. Core heat dumps at a rate that far exceeds the natural decline. The rening you see in your hands and face after the shower is the vasodilation made visible, the warm blood flowing outward through vessels that will continue radiating heat for the next 2 minutes. The cooling that follows is the sleep mechanism. The warmth was the tool. Warm water bathing 1 to 2 hours before bed improved both sleep onset latency and overall sleep quality across a meta-analysis of studies as Heige and colleagues established in Sleep Medicine Reviews an optimal window, minutes before intended sleep onset. Enough time for the post-shower heat dissipation to produce the core temperature nadir that coincides with the moment the head touches the pillow. Vessels that cooled the body efficiently yet dilate more sluggishly at peripheral vasodilation is blunted after heat dissipation slower. The core temperature drops smaller and later. The warm shower provides the thermal forcing function. The body's own thermorelation delivers less effectively with each decade. That drowsiness you feel in the minutes after a warm shower is core temperature declining past the preoptic threshold. The hypothalamus detecting the drop and initiating the sleep cascade through neurochemical inhibition of the brainstem arousal centers. The younger body produced this trajectory automatically through its own circadian vasodilation. The older body needs the assist. The circadian amplitude that once moved core temperature from daytime peak to nighttime nadir in a clean arc has flattened. The evening decline shallower, the tipping point harder to reach without the vascular boost the warm water delivers. 3 inputs prepare the terrain. Each one change the environment around the body. Meal timing, light wavelength, skin temperature, external conditions set for sleep. But what opens the gate the repair program sits behind? What comes next is different. 3 inputs that activate pathways the nervous system must engage before the overnight repair window can open. The gate is autonomic. The key is vagal, and the vagus nerve that must turn that key has been compressed, underactivated, and declining in capacity for decades. Passage first. Your vagus nerve exits. Gate. Releasing the vagus nerve, the skull through the jugular foramen, a bony canal at the base of the cranium shared with 2 other cranial nerves, and the internal jugular vein approximately millimeters in its longest diameter. It does not widen, it cannot expand to accommodate swelling in the surrounding tissue and surrounding it. The suboccipital muscles, four paired muscles connecting the skull base to the first two cervical vertebrae, have been locked in sustained isometric contraction for the full duration of your screen-lit downward gazing day, to kilograms of effective load depending on the degree of forward head displacement, compressing the passage and every structure inside it for hours without release. The muscles are small, designed for precision adjustment of head position, and the sustained load converts them from instruments of fine rotational control into structural beams locked against gravity for the full waking day. Tennis ball peanut positioned at the suboccipital ridge, the gap between the two balls straddling the spine, to seconds of sustained pressure. The suboccipital muscles that carried the day's load released through ischemic compression followed by reactive vasodilation, blood rushing back into tissue that has been oxygen deprived since your last position change. Warmth spreading across the base of the skull is the return of circulation to tissue that was functionally ischemic. The sensation is specific, a softening that starts deep at the skull base and radiates outward as the locked fibers release in sequence. And underneath the muscular release, a change you did not initiate. The breath deepens without conscious effort. The exhale lengthens. Heart rate drops. The vagal brake that was mechanically weakened by the compression strengthens as the compression lifts. The jugular famine passage widens. Muscle volume decreases. The vagus nerve travels through with less compression. The signal arrives at the brainstem at closer to full strength. Decades of forward posture have produced structural fascial remodeling at this site. The compression is years of collagen laid down along the lines of habitual stress, cross-linked further by glycation products with each passing decade. Daily release prevents further adhesion, maintains the passage width the nerve requires, and restores signal capacity that accumulated compression was degrading. Anyone with cervical spine pathology should consult a physician before applying sustained pressure at the skull base. For the majority who carry the standard postural load of modern screen life, the evening release is the daily maintenance before asking the nerve to initiate the autonomic shift. Sleep depends on, but can the nerve deliver the signal if the airway bypasses the factory that supplies the lungs with their overnight vasodilatory molecule? Tongue pressed to the hard gate, nasal breathing and nitric oxide palate, saline rinse if nasal congestion is present. The genioglossus, the largest extrinsic tongue muscle, maintains palatal contact during waking hours through habitual use, pressing the tongue body against the roof